Son of a gun. Chris, you moved on me.
I didn't move anything.
I know you didn't do anything, but OBS did. So, all right. Hello and welcome to Tabletop Journeys presents Tabletop Cafe. You can think of us as your roadside diner along your RPG journeys, serving up bite-sized chunks of gaming goodness for you to enjoy with you and your friends at your table. Tonight we have a pretty special episode. I'm pretty excited about it. We are going to do a full debrief over the Dragonlance Queen of the Dragon Shadow Lady Shadow. Yeah, that one. It's a
Shadow of the Dragon Queen.
That's the one I meant. So this is
There we
a
go.
D&D 5e adventure book full campaign that Chris recently finished running, though recently we're using that term loosely, over on the RPG Academy Twitch channel. It is now available in podcast form. The last few episodes are still on the RPG Academy feed, but most of our stuff has now been moved over to archive.org, which is where all the RPG Academy podcasts are. So we are going to kind of deep dive into running that module. We're going to start big picture and pretty vague, but at some point we are going to get hardcore into spoiler territory. So this is a GM discussion, not a player discussion. So we might talk about plot points, NPCs, reveals, betrayals, that kind of thing. So if you are someone who might play in this campaign, we will give you a little bit of warning when we get to that point, but there will be a point where we get deep into spoilers. With that out of the way, join us tonight, of course, is Lee Wanika. Lee Wanika, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lee Wanika of Tabletop Journeys, one of the many members of the team, one of the co-hosts of our Friday show, and one of the co-writers on our most recent creative endeavor. And I don't know if this is going to show up with all the backgroundy stuff, but
We're getting part of
the
it.
travel. Yeah, there we go. The Traveler's Guide. Nope, it totally background on me. There we go. The Traveler's Guide to Factions. This beautiful 183 plus page supplement book source book is just designed around factions and how to make them really sing in your games. And the real core conceit is it's not for any specific game system. These are concepts. These are factions, 9 detailed ones, and then a full chapter on how to build your own using our thought process and methodology, just to make your games a lot of fun. So this is something you can drop into any campaign, use as background material for characters you want to build for just about anything you do.
Very, very cool. And then, of course, our third co-host is the one who's actually been through this module. It's Chris.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's been a couple weeks.
It has.
No worries. I know you went on vacation. I didn't feel good one day, so life happens.
I think I had a medical thing. I had to drive up for like an appointment. So yeah, we've been missing a little bit, but this is something we've been wanting to do for quite a while. I'm really hopeful this will be a fun episode for people to watch and listen to, particularly someone who is thinking about running that particular module or really just any module. Because you and I have talked about this before. That's not something we do a lot. In fact, if I understand, this is the first time you've ever actually ran a full module, right?
A full thick module. I've run some of the old school second edition smaller modules, never run like Tube of Annihilation or anything like that might actually, just outright kill a character.
Yeah.
I run some smaller ones and stuff like that. I always shied away from them because with my dyslexia, sometimes reading things can get a little frustrating versus me just describing what I see in my head. So I was kind of shied away from it. But when they came out with this, I had to get into it. I had to try it.
You're a Dragonlance fan. That's why this one stuck out to you.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started playing D&D, when I was, 13, 14 years old, Dragonlance was the first fantasy style books that I read after doing a bunch of the choose your own adventure stuff. It was the first one that actually had the D&D setting. I loved how the writers, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, how they described things, how they built the world, how they had all the different factions going on and the war that was going on. I loved their description of magic. I mean, I had a real hard time when I first started playing D&D. Like, why would you ever play a wizard? Sleep. All right. Well, I'm done for the combat. Your turn, Michael. Like, it didn't make sense to me why you would want to do that. until I read the books and the way they described Raceland learning magic and the struggles he had. And, eventually he became, the Raceland that everybody knows is the guy that could basically kill the gods if he wanted to. That's when it really clicked with me. Oh, now I'm understanding how a wizard works in D&D. Because again, as a kid, I was very tactical in my mindset of, well, a fighter never has to stop swinging a sword.
Right.
Why would you play anything else? And it's kind of what I stuck with for a long time. But the books really opened my eyes to that.
I agree with you. And it's funny you mentioned sleep because that was the first big spell that caught my eye when I first read Dragons of Spring Dawning, when they're by the lake and they're like right in that, I think it was like maybe the second chapter at most, but it may have even been in the first chapter. They're they're in this conflict, and all of a sudden Rayson just says sleep, and like half the people they were against just stopped being a problem. And I was like, ooh, I like me some of that. And that was the kind of thing that at the game table, I knew lots of people that played Magic users, but I don't know anybody who ever took sleep. I'm like, why are you quote unquote sleeping on sleep? That
don't
spell
sleep on
is
sleep.
crazy cool at low level. Yeah. So I'm right with you. That really drove it home for me, and I'm so excited to hear how the game went and get more about the model, because I didn't get a chance to run it. I didn't get a chance to play it. But and I probably won't ever play it. So the only thing I'm likely to ever do at some point is get a chance to run it. So this is going to be a great conversation for me.
And we don't really have a structure. We're just going to be bouncing back and forth. So Lee, we need to go jump in with questions, jump in with your own experiences and anecdotes at any time. But I want to start basically non-specifically to this module, but just what was it like running a module like this? Well, what maybe were you concerned with that turned out not to be an issue? What is something you didn't realize would be an issue and turned out to be one? But just any like overall thoughts and advice for anyone who's going to run any sort of similar full campaign module, D&D or otherwise.
Well, a lot of people that talked to me about it after I ran it, I read through the module once, put it down for a couple months, and then my prep was 10 minutes before the game. I would read however many pages I thought we would get through. So a lot of times it was kind of fresh for me as we were playing at the table, which made me a little nervous to read their descriptions to make sure I didn't get them wrong. For me, with my dyslexia, it also causes me sometimes to have a stutter, which can sometimes frustrate me. And since I was streaming it, I wanted to not be stuttering. So a lot of times I would change certain words as I was reading them because I knew, that's going to get me.
Yeah.
So I would change things, or some of their descriptions. I'm like, well, why are we using this fancy word for the color purple? And is it even purple anymore?
Right.
In the books, that was a purple cape. Well, it is now. So I changed it to fit more kind of what I remember on stuff like that. As far as running the module, they did a pretty good job of laying out the book. They started off kind of talking about a little backstory on Dragonlance, backstory on where you are in the world. Because for people that don't know Dragonlance, you're kind of in the middle of the timeline in some ways when this goes on. Because they wrote this, then they actually wrote books that have the past and then, the future. Like, if you really want to get into Dragonlance, they follow multiple generations in some of the storylines, which is pretty neat. The book, though, talks about the gods that are in the world, because the gods are very important in Dragonlance. They're constantly at war with one another. If I lived on Kryn, probably the most frustrating thing would be, hey, Lewanika, let's go worship a god. Oh, wait, that means we probably have to go fight somebody else because they're opposed to us. So it could get a little fun with that, but they did change a lot of the gods to describe them, Takesis is basically Tiamat. Paladin is basically the big Bahamut. Thank you. So they did kind of talk about it's basically this god. It's basically this god. So people who don't know Dragonlance, it could help them understand kind of some of those relationships. Then they went into the different people on Kryn. I don't like the term race, so I always use the term species, or ancestry is actually my favorite term. So they talk about the different ancestries. So they talk about the dwarves, the elves, the gnomes, and the Kender. Probably, in my opinion, one of the most uh, div- dividing ancestries there is in D&D, because I've seen
Yeah.
people play them brilliantly and I've seen people play them horribly. For those that don't know, in the original books, Kenders are immune to fear, they have wanderlust, and they do not understand the concept of property.
Personal property.
So,
Like, yeah, all things are communal.
yeah, so for
Yeah.
them, things just, quote, fall into their pockets. And when they see another Kender, they trade objects, or anybody they think actually will trade them shiny objects, they'll trade. They're supposed to be
Knowingly
kind of
or
a,
unknowingly.
Yeah.
yeah. I, I have I have played a Kender, and as a player, I made a very conscious decision. My character will not take anything that's actually really important to your character. So, Michael, you've got that, dual wielding dagger thief. I'm not taking either of your magic daggers.
Yeah.
But that trap disarming kit, when we have to open the door, you're going to go, where the heck is it?
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, well, you dropped it back there. Here you go. Didn't really affect the scene. Well, I mean, it affected the scene, but it didn't affect your character. Your character isn't going to die because the Kender
Yeah.
took your favorite magic weapon.
Yeah, I love the way you described that, because the one or two times I've played Kenders, that was kind of my same thought process. Like anything I took, it wasn't the primary thing, but it had to be somewhat meaningful so that when it came up, it mattered that I had it, but it wasn't I had it so I could use it. It was I had it so I could give it to you. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, Johnny was captured it in chains. It's like, well, Johnny, thankfully you loaned me or you dropped this earlier and I picked it up for you because now I can pick the locks for you. You were chained up. You weren't going to be able to do that, and then like I'll get the locks for him and then I'm like, and here's your kit back, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
those types of things are very essential to playing the Kender that my fellow players didn't hate.
Yeah. That's the divisiveness, is that some people just use that as an example for that's what my character would do, to kind of like ruin the game for other people or other characters and just make it all about them in a not fun way, versus add some entertainment and levity, but it's not really going to critically cause someone's character to fail or to Chris's point, die. I do want to jump in there because I feel like we've already jumped from general to specific, because I wanted to start higher level before we got into the Shadowlands or Dragonlance specifically. So one thing I wanted to touch on, you mentioned box text, because that is one of my pet peeves as a game master and a player. Is like, if you're running a module, the module will generally provide you with boxed text. If anyone's unfamiliar, it's literally, usually it's like a description that the module wants you to present to the players with all the important information they need. Like, they approach the castle, there's a windswept clouds, there's, a figure with a flapping cape up on the balcony, there's a river below, there's a guard at the door. It's all the things that you would need as a player to know what your options and choices are, more or less. But I'm a big believer that you should never just read that from the book. Like, I don't care how good you are at reading and reading out loud. I am going to just like completely blank if you start reading. So I think you should always, if not rewrite, like paraphrase and put it into your own language. It should feel to me like the GM is just presenting it, even if they are reading it. And there may be people who can do that as a skill and I don't notice. But anytime I've actually seen someone read from a module, like they just literally look down and read it, my brain just won't listen or comprehend. So do either of you have any specific advice or experience with better ways of doing boxed text?
Well, you alluded to it yourself, Michael. The reason why I tend not to do pre-written adventures is exactly that. Um, if a pre-written adventure is written well, there's enough info at the beginning that you can do what Chris has done here, which is read it through once, come back to it when you're ready to play, prep the scene or scenes or sections that you're about to run. But many that I have read are not written quite that well. Like, there's a lot of times where there's a twist that they don't preface up front. So at the table, you're in this weird situation where players are asking you questions, doing information checks, talking to different people, where certain information or certain powers and abilities or class features or subclass features should reveal this twist. But you as a GM aren't terribly aware of it because it wasn't highlighted at the beginning of chapter 3. It was buried in one piece of box text or one answer from a character halfway through chapter 3, and it wasn't highlighted. The plot twist is here. And when that has happened, then I as a GM feel like I'm lying to the players, and so then that puts me in a weird space. So I struggle with a lot of pre-writtens. That said, I always paraphrase box text for many of the same reasons, not dyslexia in my case, but ADHD. And sometimes they're just words that some people use every day that I just never use. And there's words that I use every day that other people are like, why in the world would you use that phrase for purple? Well, I happen to like fuchsia. It's a fun word.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris. But that's just one of my favorite words. And purple is one of my favorite colors. So, and I'm joking, not that's
Right.
more of a callback. But there are things that I will do differently. And if I am reading something or doing something different than that, nobody who's ever gamed with me will feel that this is authentic and this is the experience they signed up for. So I'm always going to bring me to what I do. So I tend to fudge a lot of that stuff. And I
feel like in the worst versions of box text, it completely stops the momentum of a scene. Because it's like, you might be role playing, you might be exploring, maybe you're making some skill checks, you're going through the wilderness, and all of a sudden the DM is like, as you break through the clearing, ahead of you. And it feels very inorganic. And that's not necessarily bad. Like, 'cause you got to get the information out there, but I think it feels better at the table if it doesn't seem like it's a separate entity. But ultimately, you got to get that information to the player. So if you're a newer GM, if you got to read it, it's not like that's going to ruin the experience. But I think you should work on trying to make it feel more natural, converting it into your own language, even if it's like real time, like you might like be skimming and like you're reading as you're talking type of a thing, if that's a skill you have. But ideally, it should feel just like it's a natural continuation. One of the jokes we used to have at my group up in Cleveland was save versus box text. So as soon as the GM would start doing that, we'd all go, I cast Mage Armor, I cast it, because we knew something was about to happen. Like we're transitioning from we're role playing to there's about to be an encounter. So as soon as the GM started saying something, we all just started preparing our spells and getting ready because we knew that was a change. And it became funny, but it also didn't really I don't like that as a vibe type of a thing. And go ahead, please, Chris.
I agree with you. I think part of the reason that I also have a hard time with box tech is a lot of the first and second edition modules, I would sit at little conventions or a new GM would be reading it and they would go through and, you enter the cave, you see 3 skeletons, and behind the skeletons is a large chest. If the players open it, oh, I'm not supposed to read that part.
Yeah.
Or the really badly written modules, you'd read like 3 paragraphs, and at the bottom it would say, only read the first paragraph to the players.
Yeah. I've literally had that happen too, where they're like, inside the chest is a magic sword. Oh, wait. There's a chest. You don't know what's like. I mean, again, and that happens. It doesn't ruin the game. But as far as your prep goes, you should be prepping in a way that you avoid that. So that leads me to my next question. Again, big picture. You said for your prep, you read through the module once. And then like a month later, as you were going through the game, like, okay, we're going to start tonight. So you probably read the first 4 or 5 pages for what you thought would happen. If you were to run this particular module again, or any similar module, would you do anything different than that?
Probably not. I think for me personally, if I read through this 18 times before I brought it to the table, it's not going to be as fresh and exciting for me. And I'm going to end up rewriting it so many times, it's not going to be the same module anymore. I'm going to, especially like a Dragonlance one, and I went, little into this one, they changed a lot of the original feel of Dragonlance. So I changed things to pull some of that original feel back. Um, and I think that's important for modules is to know that, what world are you setting it in? Is it your world? Is it, Faerun? Is it Kryn, Eberron? And really capture that feel. And this module, a little less Dragonlance, a little more generic.
Yeah.
So
And
I had to pull some of that back.
and that's probably somewhat by design because Dragonlance wasn't a world that a lot of people were familiar with who came into 5th edition. So they wanted to make it easier to run versus someone who's deep into the lore. And I think that is the job of a good GM to bring their own version of it and to pull in the things they want, or even make it their own, change it from like maybe get further away from Dragonlance, but to make it their own. And that's totally okay. Like whenever you play D&D, you're basically playing your version of D&D. And when you run this module, you're running your version of this module, and that's totally fine. So I have oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I absolutely concur. Every GM needs to understand that they are making it their own. We in the content creation community are constantly talking about homebrew. We're constantly talking about this is what you do to homebrew X, Y, or Z. The reality is, every time a GM sits down at the table, it's their homebrew. So if it wasn't, they'd be playing a computer game, right? So that always happens. And the beauty of what the Dragonlance campaign world brings with, I think it's well over like 90 different books. Like I can't even count how many different novels there are, books, comic books at one point. Who knows? I mean, ridiculous. There are Dragonlance cookbooks that I own or probably still on the shelf somewhere. Dragonlance aplenty. So with all of that history, everybody who's running it will bring the part that they knew and loved to it. And that's where the third party content creation community comes in. Tabletop Journeys a couple years ago, when this particular campaign came out, was blessed with being able to do a freelance project for Splinterverse Media. We actually wrote a tier 1 adventure for characters in the Dragonlance setting, and one of the things that we had tried to do is, I don't want to do what happened in the novels, but I want people to know this campaign world. So our goal was to hit the sites, do our own kind of story, but hit the sites. So our own kind of story took place in 4 different locations that were central to Dragonlance, but at slightly different times, either weeks, months before or weeks, months after the things that took place in the novel. And we just did our own story that had nothing to do with anything else. And that's how we brought the flavor of Kryn to what we did. And when we get to it, that's kind of like my question I would ask Chris as a fellow Dragonlance fan. How do you feel they did bringing that flavor to the campaign?
Tough answer. I think that they kept. I think they, in a way, were trying to kind of reinvent Dragonlance a little bit. So Dragonlance was written in the 80s, early 80s, maybe mid 80s.
83 through 80. It was, I think
Something
it was a
like
module 83, 84, and the novels were like 84, 85 ish when they first came out, something like
yeah.
that.
So you had a lot of ideals in the world that may not match with what currently we're trying to do with role playing. So the best example I could come up with right off the top of my head is the Knights of Solamnia. Originally, they were all men.
Yep.
There were no females. This book, the first one you meet is female. I said to the players, I don't care. I think it's awesome. We're rolling with it.
Yeah.
And the players then asked me, well, what do we call her? Well,
Sir.
call her Captain Becklin. That's her name. Mm-hmm. Well, that's actually, somebody goes, well, when I want to salute, is it yes, sir, yes, ma'am? I'm like,
Correct.
Whatever comes out of your mouth.
Yeah.
And the players decided, yes, sir. So I went with that. So they changed some of that to fit more of the modern idea of gaming.
Well, I don't even know if I would call that like modernization as much as like when you're writing a book, that's different versus a game, because you could have a person at your table who identifies as female who wants to play that subclass, and I'm never going to tell a player, no, you can't. But if I'm writing a book, absolutely there can be an all female, all male, all whatever, species organization, because that's like flavor and texture. But when you bring players into it and they're playing in the sandbox, I mean, there are some examples I can think of where keeping those lines might add to the flavor, but that's one where like 100%, absolutely. If somebody wants to play, I don't care. Moving on.
Yeah. Well, here's the beauty of it, and so Josh and I have spent the last 3-4 years doing a detailed review of the most recent 3 Dragonlance novels, and one of the key elements of the Dragonlance novels, like the hero of those novels, is Lady Destina, who is the daughter of a knight of Solamnia, and her trials and tribulations. And without too many spoilers, one of the coolest things that I saw very early on in the first book, and it took all 3 novels to do it, is in very Dragonlance form, there's time travel shenanigans. She and many other heroes go back in time to do different things, but Lady Destina was critical in helping Huma and I'm getting really deep in the weeds here. Huma and his beloved Silver Dragon defeat Takesis like 3,000 years in the past. And because of what Huma wrote, that changed the future so that now women can be Knights of Solamnia. So I think the book and that campaign, which came out after that first novel, but before the third novel, basically said, we know where we're getting. So they just wrote it based on, by the time the novels come out, women will be allowed, and that will, in the game world, be history. So they actually changed time to reflect the fact that we need to put this novel story into a game setting. So I think that was an intentional thing, but it sounds like they didn't do a great job of explaining that to the GM so that the GM had the ability to explain that to their players.
Well, again, that may be something that they shouldn't know, like unless it's common knowledge. So I don't know. But again, I feel like we're getting way into the weeds here. Again, the purpose of this is to focus on the module. So I guess the question I want to ask before we get into the specifics of the module is, on a scale of 1 to 100, 1 being you titled the adventure Dragonlance, and 100 meaning you ran this exactly to the book, every encounter, every NPC, everything 100%. Where do you say you fell in your running this campaign? And it's not
me or the way it's written.
The way you ran it versus the way it's written. And again, this isn't subjective, like good or bad. I'm just wondering, like, how closely do you think you followed the book to the letter?
Probably 75, 80.
Okay.
Somewhere in there.
Where did you start to vary? Was it page 1, or was there like a moment 3/4 of the way through that you're like, that feels weird, and then it, like, once something happened, you just kept getting further away? Or like, your thoughts, like when did that 25% start to happen?
It was pretty close to the beginning.
Okay.
It was probably within the first 3 or 4 sessions. A lot of it was just smaller things. So, for example, in Dragonlance, if you came up and asked a gnome their name, they would take a deep breath and they would just start rattling off this really long name. Well, that's not in here, but I put it in. So the first gnome they walked up to, the players were like, "Hey, who are you?" I'm like, and then I heard one of the other players go, wait, the short version. Oh, Steve. I mean, it wasn't Steve, but keeping it easy. Otherwise, I laughed. I was like, thank you, because Chris was immediately trying to think of, how do I string a bunch of letters together to make one long name?
Yeah.
So it was.
Holla at your boy.
Yeah. I could have just called you up and said, all right, say your name here and insert. But it was smaller things like that I wanted to put in there that didn't really affect the module, but it added more of the feel of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you've never read Dragonlance,
doesn't matter.
You wouldn't have known the difference. You would have been like, oh, it's a gnome.
So I don't want to minimize it and say that's a cosmetic change, but to a player who doesn't know Dragonlance, that's a cosmetic change. Someone who does, they're gonna appreciate that's the feel. So how much of your change was cosmetic versus like, oh, they fought this NPC earlier than they were supposed to, or they defeated them when they weren't supposed to, or this plot makes no sense. I'm going to jettison that subplot. I'm just going to tell them where the body is. Like, I don't know, the opposite of cosmetic, that type of adaptive change. How close do you think you followed the module?
Gotcha.
Functional.
Okay, functional. Thank you.
Really, really close.
Okay.
I would say there's only one section that I really changed, and that was because it was just a bunch of little dungeon crawls. And I'm like, okay, we're going to spend another 8 sessions going through these dungeons. And it's not fitting with the idea that there's a war going on around you. And there's a huge sense of urgency for you to race to get this item. But we're going to spend 8 multiple days hitting these little dungeons. So I said, all right, change a couple things. These NPCs find this stuff over at this cave. You find this stuff. You guys meet up. One of the players, when I said, okay, we're going to skip some of these little dungeons, made a great point. He's like, I don't want to sound greedy, but are there magic items that could help us in those? And I was like, that's a very valid point. So those NPCs just brought that stuff back. You know, I don't want to say hand waved it, but it was, I really don't see why going in here and fighting a cave troll really helps advance this story. It's just a distraction.
Yeah, let me ask a question about that, because part of my brain goes to, I could see a world or a situation where that might work or might actually be useful. But when you were running this, were you running monthly, weekly, bi-weekly? How frequent? What was your frequency of play
every
generally?
2 weeks. Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. So in my head, I'm thinking if you were playing 4 hours a week, that would make sense. Like if back when we were in high school, when you and I were playing the original 1E Dragonlance modules, when we were playing probably 2 or 3 times a week, and we're like, we're burning through these adventures, and they could not get us modules fast enough. I could see where having 8 extra sessions, I wouldn't probably put them all back to back, but I could see where those 8 extra sessions could be useful for supplying time. Because how epic is your campaign if you're done in a month, right? But that's because
fair.
we were playing 2 or 3 times a week, probably more, but at least we had other games going also. So, but if you're playing twice a month at most, you drop at least 4 of those sessions every 6 months for holidays and goofiness. I could see where, okay, I need to truncate this, because we're doing it long enough for it to be epic, but we're only putting in maybe 2 hours at a shot, 3 hours max, not these 4 to 5 hour epics 3 times, 1 or 2 times a week. So I think they kind of, that may play into why it was there. I would have probably said, hey, here's some optional things you could put in if you're playing with high frequency to make this work better for you. But the one thing I would also, and I'm sorry to bogart the mic too much, but Michael, when you said that seemed more cosmetic than functional, while I largely agree with you, the thing I would say that would make it less cosmetic and actually part of the function is if you take Faerun as the basis for 5e, those little flavor things, those cosmetic things, are the only thing that separates it from Faerun.
Yeah.
So absent those, a player's like, why are we even calling this Dragonlance? This might as well be Soothsail. This might as well be the Sword Coast.
That actually leads me into my next question I wanted to ask. So we're going to get a little bit more specific to the module. I know that in Dragonlance there are some species or ancestry specific things like they're called Draconians, or which again I think there's like some IP stuff. They're not allowed to use that terminology, but essentially like Dragonborn. Kinder were introduced. How much do you think the players need to play those options? Like, do you need someone to play a Kinder, and do you need someone to play a Knight of Somalia or Solamnia to make it feel like Dragonlance? Like, if you just had 4 fighters, is that are you gonna lose some of the flavor? And again, why are you even calling it Dragonlance if no one's eventually going to get on a dragon with a big lance?
I don't think so. The Knights of Solamnia are. I mean, you're basically just playing a very strict paladin.
It's like a paladin. Do they have the powers like healing, or is it more like a oath of?
No.
They just follow like a vow oath sort of thing. They have to do certain things, can't do certain things.
I guess paladin is the wrong term. Cavalier.
Okay, yeah.
The old school cavalier that they used to have. They do have mounted combat stuff. Like, I mean, jumping into the module, that's by one of my complaints, but we can get into that later. But you don't have to. And a matter of fact, when I ran this, the players that I was playing with have, they've never streamed. They've gamed with me for years. They were nervous about streaming and they were concerned about how people would see it. And since it wasn't necessarily our network, it was your network, Michael, we wanted to respect the RPG Academy's values. So we talked about, okay, we're not going to play Kender. Dragonborn, they look very similar to a Draconian, which they do still call them Draconians.
They're also vastly different. I have had to have a number of conversations at conventions trying to let people know Dragonborn and Draconians very different. Draconians are magically created things that were born from stolen good dragon eggs and perverted with very evil magic to make subservient minions for Tachesis by the Queen of Evil. They are never going to be player characters. So the question of can somebody play a Dragonborn and drop them in, I imagine they could, but that would be a very tough sell in Kryn because nobody wants any part of anything that looks like a dragon. I mean, even if you played a silver dragon or a gold Dragonborn, you would, if you're being true to the campaign world, that wouldn't fly. And, even if you're yes anding, it's like that would be a real tough road to sled for a GM, I think.
When we did our session 0, we talked about that exact same thing. And a big part of Dragonlance is dragons. It's funny enough, Dragonlance is in the name, but dragons aren't there. They're in hiding because of previous story points. So to have a Dragonborn, for those of us that were big Dragonlance fans, were like, it doesn't fit because the dragons are hiding. So why would the Dragonborn be there?
Clerics and paladins are also challenged because early on there is no clerical magic because all the gods are also hiding, so they're not giving people spells. Like that's actually part of the setting.
And that leads into, again, one of my other questions that kind of wrap together is like in a traditional party, generally you have a healer. You can't have clerics. Would a druid or a bard suffice for healing? Do they also not have healing? Like, how do you compensate for not having a healer in the party? I'm not one that says you have to, but a lot of groups are going to say we need a fighter, we need a rogue, we need a cleric, we need a thief. Can't really have a cleric. How does that work?
I said play a cleric. Okay, so my friend Skip played a cleric. He knows Dragonlance really well. The conversation beforehand was, you're going to get a lot of people thinking you're crazy, a lot of people thinking you're a witch. You're going to have a lot of NPCs that don't trust you because you're going around going, I'm a champion of Kiri Jolith. I have magical powers from my god. And people are going to go, there are no gods, you goober. You must be a magic user or you're just crazy. But in the game, because he could do some of these, I don't want to use the term miracle, but he could heal and stuff like that. I tied that in the story and said, okay, people are starting to warm up to you. You're now going to be bringing Kiri Jolith back to this area. So there is a way of putting that in Dragonlance. You just need to have that really good conversation with the player and go, yeah, the first time you say, I'm a cleric of Kiri Jolith, people are going to go, ha, 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 have another drink, goober. And we played it well. And we didn't hammer that too hard because we didn't want that to be the focus of the story. We wanted the war to be the focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in the novels, and I'm assuming as the module went on, and let me know if I'm wrong about that, one of the major characters of the novels, who was a cleric, for lack of a better term, she was just the first one that anybody knew. And throughout the course of the initial novel set, others were known to have been popping up. So it's not that you can't have them, it's just they don't start as well known. So what Chris described is, if somebody wanted to play that role, or if your game group wanted to have somebody do that, that's kind of the story. You got to have a player who's willing to go through kind of that progression, which works with the levels. Level one clerics don't
Mhm.
do a whole lot, right? Level two clerics do a little bit more. So literally, you're growing in power as your god is returning to the world and trusting you to carry their message. So there's ways to do it. You just kind of have to work that out. And it sounds like you found a great way to do it. And but it also
Mhm.
sounds like the module itself didn't really speak to that. That was just something you had to bring in. Again, those cosmetic things that because you knew the flavor of the world. So
Yeah. Honestly, the harder one would have been bringing in the wizards. Because in Dragonlance, you have the Wizards Conclave that determines basically how magic can be done. And if you don't pass your test, you're considered renegade. That means any wizard can kill you. So to me, playing a warlock in Dragonlance would be tough. Maybe even playing a bard. Like you might be able to play the bard off as it's not arcane, it's more, I don't know,
some
musical, or I mean, you could get creative with that one. Um, Sorcerers would be a little more difficult. Otherwise, if you wanted to play a sorcerer, I'd say, okay, it's a sorcerer class, but you're really still a mage
Hmm.
in the world.
yeah.
You're just gonna, you've learned to use your charisma when casting the spells versus reading the real intricacies of the spell. So that one would have been a little harder because you'd have to then choose, am I white robe, red robed, black robed? Now you've got the different, lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful evil, basically, that you have to play. Luckily for me, none of the players wanted to play a wizard, so we didn't have to really dive into it. The module does cover the different wizards conclave, and there is a point in the module where you're supposed to have the player take his or her test. I I will honestly say I disagree, because you do it at like seventh or eighth level.
Okay.
Mm,
It's pretty tough to add real danger in at that level. The idea of the test in the original books was, all right, Michael, you're third level. Let's go. By the way, if your character doesn't pass this test, they're dead.
you're dead.
Hmm.
Like
I mean,
it is literally pass or die,
yeah,
because
there,
either you're good enough to use it and they trust you, or they kill you because they don't ever want you to be using it.
yeah. It was, a lot harsher back then, but in Dragonlance, they controlled magic because they knew how dangerous it could be.
Hmm.
They became a political faction, but
Of course,
anyways,
yeah. Everything is corrupted. Okay,
yeah.
so let's get very specific. So this is the point. I don't think we've done anything yet that I would consider spoilery, but we are probably going to get to it because, again, we don't have a ton of time left, so we got to get into some stuff.
Mhm.
So if you're someone who might be playing this, this is the part where you probably want to jump out. So what is the initial call to action for this module? Like, what's the first encounter or story beat that the GM is going to present to the players? And what advice would you have for someone to really let this land so that the players are invested right off the bat in session one?
I will give them props. They did a great job. Everybody is traveling to Volgar for the funeral of their great friend Ispin Greenshield, who's a very larger than life, or was a very larger than life character. He traveled all around. Everybody knows Ispin. All the players are traveling to meet. They all have a little prelude scene that kind of helps kind of describe what their character class is to them. And then they all meet up in Vogler. They have the funeral, and then the Red Dragon army comes in and slaps Volgar, and now they're all realize they're now involved in an invasion.
Okay.
So it happens quick. I liked how they did that. I threw in a little twist of when they have in the book, oh, it's Ispin's funeral. This person, NPC, comes up and talks. Meanwhile, this NPC is being a jerk. The GM said, cool. Each player, you need to get up and say something about I don't think I did each player, but I had players would go up and talk and tell a story about how they knew Ispin. And the idea there was then they would all bond over what was going on in the funeral. And then, like I said, there's a festival, and then the Red Dragon army attacks during the festival. And it's a big betrayal.
Mm.
You know, this army or these mercenaries are supposed to be helping. Well, then they don't. Well, then the party has to help people escape because you're on a riverbank and jump in the boats. Let's go. Let's go. That's where I learned pretty quick in the module. They underpowered a lot of the combats. A lot of the combats, if I ran them as written, 2-3 rounds, you're done. Next scene. And I'm like, that's not really all that, I don't want to say heroic, but 2 or 3 rounds, I feel like some of us are just getting warmed up with what we're doing. And I don't feel like there's a lot of tension in that. So a lot of times I gave the NPCs extra health, maybe a little extra armor class, or they might hit a little harder. It really just depended upon how I wanted that scene to go.
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to add to the tension of everybody running away so the bad guys last a little longer? Or do I want to give the tension that your character's about to die so they're going to hit harder? Like I modified a lot of those encounters, but I liked how they brought everybody together with the festival and the funeral, and then bam, the army attacks.
So that brings me to a question, because this happens a lot, especially newer GMs who run D&D. Players don't like to run away. They don't like to be in a no-win situation. But if this is truly an invasion, 4 first level or second level characters ain't going to stop it. It seems like they're there to defend an area and then escape. How does the module present the idea that you're not here to win this fight? You're here to survive this fight.
They did a pretty good job with bringing in the NPCs, Captain Becklin, and then Darrett, who Darrett's her squire. They did a good job of having them kind of grabbing the players, going, you need to help everybody escape. We'll hold off the invading force. Your job is get out of here.
Okay.
Fight anything between here and the water. Don't stay here and fight this. That's our job as, the town protectors and stuff. And then that led to other things because, do they survive? Yes or no? And the module actually says, if you choose to have them die, here's some ideas. Or if you choose to have them live, here's some ideas. So they did a good job with that. I had some fun because one of the players was playing a squire of a knight of Salamnia. Well, Darrett here is kind of the small town boy that gets to meet, big time world traveler, even though Clay's like, dude, I'm a squire. I haven't traveled much. This is like my first mission. But Darrett immediately was like, well, you have to tell me all your grand stories. So I couldn't have him die. So he kept popping back up, and which was good because he's written in to kind of pop back up too. So I got to have a little extra fun with that.
So that leads me to another question I want to ask, but I actually had a question that I want to ask here just because you brought it up. My son, John, is actually going to start running this campaign Friday. He's working on getting the characters together, and he's actually watching right now. Hi, John. But he wanted me to ask you, the book has an option for Becklin coming back after an implied death. Did you choose for her to return or stay dead? And do you think your decision was the right one, or would you change it if you were to do it again?
I did have her come back, but it was more a symbolic. She survives, but she realizes it's not her time anymore. I would say it's not her time. It's not her role right now to win. She knows that the party has to do it. So she pushes the party and she pushes Darrett. But I had her be severely injured. So she also wasn't really able to do much. And I think the book kind of suggests that.
Okay.
I'd have to skip through that part. But I played it up more of it's your turn to, especially with Clay being that squire of it's your turn to be the hero. My time has passed. I also kept Captain Becklin alive because the player starts as a squire, not a knight. Then at 5th level, it's like, hey, take the feat, you're now a knight. But they didn't do any ceremony, and Dragonlance had very specific ceremonies for the knights. I kept Captain Becklin alive so that we could do an actual in-game knighting ceremony of Clay's character. So there's a whole episode we did with her or him getting knighted by her. Not in the book, if anybody listens to it. 100% me making stuff up based on LARPing stuff I've done and stuff I read online. And, I had the players get involved with it. They each had a part in the knighting ceremony, and then I had Captain Becklin actually knight him. I felt that was a better story element than just going, all right, you're 5th level. Congratulations, Michael, you're a knight.
So for that reason, do you think it would be a good idea for a GM to kind of like push, not require, but push for someone to be a squire so that we could have that sort of, through line?
I thought it was a really cool story arc to help the player develop that character and give that character more responsibilities and more weight on their shoulder. I think it added more depth to the character.
Okay.
So yes, I would say if you have somebody that wants to play a knight like that, or even just a fighter, they don't necessarily have to start as a squire. They could just start as a fighter who proves themselves and then gets knighted.
Mm-hmm.
I think then they could choose those 5th level feats or not. I mean, however they want to do it.
All right. So for the book, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that my experience, and I've run some games in Dragonlance, and obviously I wrote a Dragonlance adventure. What I found was, generally speaking, if you have players that are familiar with the world, someone's going to want to take one of those things that allows that through line. If you have players that are not familiar and you've done a good job with those cosmetic kind of add-ons that you would do, your players are going to want to join into those through lines. So whether someone is or is not a squire or what have you, simply just saying, I need you to help these people, and having that NPC saying, would I have had just one squire like you, Jonathan? That would be wonderful. You should consider doing that someday. Just have the NPC say that, and now maybe that character takes that 4th level feat and does the squire thing because it was suggested. Like, wow, I could do that, and like they really want me to do this. So, just have that fighter and have people say you act just like a knight, and then maybe they'll want to take on those through lines anyway. So you can get people into those positions whether they start that way or not. I think it can be harmful to try to force that if folks are unfamiliar and don't want to do it naturally. So, I mean, if I were in the advice giving chair, I would say if they want to, help them do it. If they know it, make it sing for them also. And if they don't know it and they're unsure, say, when you're ready, we're here. And just make sure you're building in the story hooks so that when they say, oh, I really do think that's cool, let me try that, the narrative was already built to allow that transition.
Okay. So we're about an hour in. Normally we try to keep these to an hour, but I don't think we're ready to quit yet. So we're going to keep going a little bit longer at least, because I've definitely got some more questions and we want this to be valuable for people listening.
Somebody in chat has a good question.
Oh, please. I can't see it, so please.
Ooh, I'm not going to be able to say your name. My apologies. I'm just calling you Buzz because that's the first 3 letters. If you haven't read Dragonlance, Buzz, yeah. Again, my dyslexia is going to confuse that one. But if you've never read Dragonlance, how would you DM the knighting ceremony? What I did is I just Googled knighting ceremony in Dragonlance, found some stories that people had done in the world, and I used some of that. Then I just kind of used some of my LARPing experience with having different people come up and say something about the person. Technically, we did what I called a field knighting, because in Dragonlance, you were supposed to go back to the tower of, I think, Palanthus, or was it the other one? Doesn't matter, whichever tower.
Yeah.
It's one of the two. Anyways, we didn't have time in the game to do that, but Captain Becklin felt like it needed to be done, as well as Clay's actual knight felt it needed to be done. So they did a field knighting. So it was a little different. I personally looked at, okay, Skip's playing a cleric. He's doing the opening. Thank the gods. This has happened. Thank Kiri Jolith. He played the role of what they call the High Clerist, which is basically the cleric in charge. Then I had like Dave's character came out and presented. I think Dave's character presented him his cloak, his purple cloak, and then talked about why he's getting a cloak and what the cloak represented. Somebody else came out and presented him like his sword and explained what the sword represents, and then we did the actual knighting. I just wanted to involve the players somehow, so they weren't just sitting there listening to me narrate for 20 minutes about a knighting ceremony that didn't have anything to do with their character. Because, as you said, Michael, earlier, you start doing something like that, and players are gonna
On the phone. They're going to get out.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, a couple things. One, you can listen to that. Like that's an episode of the show that's still audio. So you could go back and listen to exactly how Chris did it if you would like. But if you have, because again, I know John's going to be running this and his players are fairly new, inexperienced. They may aren't the most adept at role playing. Would you think it'd be okay to like prompt them and say, player one, you're going to give him his cloak. Here are some things you might say. Like, don't give them a script, but like, here's 3 ideas for something you might, to kind of like prompt them to do a little speech as a role play element.
What you just described is 100% what I did.
Okay.
I sent messages. Well, I just called them on the phone. Hey, Dave, can you do X, Y, and Z in the ceremony? Present the cloak. This is why. Hey, Skip, can you come up with a cool little opening? I don't think I called it a prayer, but there's a specific term for when you use a prayer at the opening of a ceremony that I don't remember right off the top of my head. But
Benediction.
yeah,
I think that's at the end.
Somebody will tell me someday, and then I won't
I was an
remember it.
altar server almost 40 some odd years ago. So like,
Yeah.
It's been a hot minute.
And part of it for me is I put the knighting ceremony in a session when one of the players couldn't be there. So we didn't have to deal with, all right, Lewanika, you can't be here. So your character's off polishing the marble statue to raise morale. Like it gave a reason. Well, not a reason. It gave us the ability to continue the story, but not have the player get left behind. Because again, we're in a war. So the book is very much, all right, guys, thank you for completing that mission. But guess what? We just found out this is going on. We need you to go now. Like I really push that sense of you don't have time to sit here and do much. You get a night off, go. All right, you're back. You get a night off, go. Like they really didn't have a lot of time to sit down and sharpen their swords or go to the bar. And
I do see it as a very impactful scene. Like I do really like the fact that you kind of made that a moment, not just for the character, but all the characters, and then for the story. Because again, I read the original Dragonlance novels years and years ago. I didn't really dive deep into it, but the idea of that sort of ceremony feels Dragonlance to me. So it's definitely something I think maybe the book should have like put in there. You kind of found a place for it, and I'm really glad that our listeners might be trying to do something similar. I do want to ask though, again, this is a war story. Dragonlance, it's a war story. Is this just combat to combat to combat? Does it give places for like NPC or like negotiation can resolve encounters? Are there skill challenges, or is it like set up, fight, set up, fight?
They do have some good role-playing moments. They have some, go here and do this. Not every one of those is a combat. Some of those are, you get there and you find a gnome's lab is being attacked. Why are they attacking this gnome's lab? Okay, well, now you rescue Tatina and you got to figure out, Tatina has this kind of impact on the group. And they do have some skill challenges. The Northern Wastes, I believe it is kind of a hex crawl. They have little hexes you're supposed to go through. I'll be honest with you, I started to do that, and then I was like, I'm supposed to have you roll for a random encounter on every one of these hexes, and it takes 4 hexes to go from point A to point B. This is going to get very time-consuming. So I, at first, just had them roll for one time. Well, we had somebody who had really high survival, so they always made it. I just made it a group check. I kept it simple. In part because I'm not a big fan of just random encounters.
Yeah, I hate random encounters.
a lot of the charts they had in here that did random things during combats, a lot of them I would take out because it didn't fit with what I was picturing the scene to be. Like I think it's in one of the first fights. You roll randomly at like initiative 1, and one of it is a rain of arrows hits the area. Why are the bad guys firing into their own troops? This isn't Braveheart.
Mm-hmm.
Like they know that's a valuable lieutenant. They're not going to fire into that area. So I took some of those out just because I didn't like it. And then, like I said, the random encounters I took out. I gave them the feel that the waste could randomly flood, and they did have one time they failed, and then they had to deal with the flood. And then after that, I was like, okay, your characters have experienced this. They know how to avoid it in the future. We don't need to keep rolling every hex to do this. Now, if your players think that's fun, that's great, but some of the random monsters didn't make sense. Hey, it floods. There's a dinosaur.
I did just watch a movie this week where that actually makes sense. All right. What was your favorite combat encounter, and why was it your favorite?
So there is an NPC, Baracus the Elder. He is a political figure. He's actually really a coward, but he is constantly poking his nose into politics. Big spoiler, there's a scene where he actually turns on the city of Kalaman, where most of the adventure kind of bases out of. I had a scene where the players find him opening a gate to try to let the Red Dragon army in. They fought. That's my favorite battle because I changed the battle slightly. Clay's playing a Knight of Solamnia. RJ was playing a thief who, through most of the game, would be like, I'll stab it. What's he got? Where's my money? Meanwhile, the Knight of Solamnia is like, no. We can't just go kill something. We have to have proof that they're bad. We can't just assume and just stab everybody. Earlier in the game, RJ's character had said to the marshal of the city in a private conversation, if you want Baracus to not be a problem anymore, let me know. I'll take care of it. Chris interpreted that of, you want me to off the bad guy, I will. Not 100% sure that's what RJ meant, but scene happens. Baracus is there. He's got some guards. As I've said before, Baracus had as many hit points as I needed him to have at that moment because that scene was about one thing, and that was the initiative order. And I'll say big spoilers. I completely flubbed the initiative order. Baracus went right before RJ's character because when he got to a point where his guards were dead, he looked at Clay's character, knelt down and held his sword up and said, I surrender. I immediately then looked at RJ and said, what do you do? His back's to you, what do you do? I loved it because the player goes, hold on. I need a moment to figure out what would my character do. Would he stab this guy in the back right in front of the Knight of Solamnia, knowing that he could potentially get in trouble, or would he take him prisoner? Has my character changed his views on things? Take all the time you need. It took RJ all the 30 seconds to go, yeah, I stabbed him in the back. I hate this guy. Why am I even thinking about it? Like, this guy's been a thorn in our side from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Stabbed him in the back. Now Clay's character has to deal with, why did you do that? I loved it because I was able to build that scene up to that moment. And to watch the player have that big smile on his face as he's like, oh no, I have to actually make a moral decision here, which I knew was one thing that RJ would love. So it was that moment I could really give that player his moment. And then, he offs him, and then he goes back and says to the marshal, I don't think Baracus is going to be a problem. Yeah. The marshal's like, great. He's like, well, he's like, no. Or she said, no. Thank you for taking care of it. Mm. Just make sure the trash isn't left on the curb.
Yeah.
And then walked away.
So I think the key thing I want to pull out here for anyone listening is that was Chris's favorite in combat encounter, not because of the stats in the book, because it sounds like those were all ignored, but because it was built to from things the players had done. And I think that is a key element that will help anyone listening become a great GM is you need to pay attention to those things. One, you need to try to lay some tracks so they can happen. But when they do happen, those earlier conversations, Chris made a note of that conversation. The Knight of Solomon character being moral is a thing that there's like a through line. They should be taking notes. And then you were able to craft this encounter where those all came together in the middle of a combat. And that's what made it memorable to you. And I imagine your players also enjoyed it. That may not have been their favorite, but it probably was memorable because it wasn't just, oh, we stab a thing until it doesn't move, but it became a character moment in the middle of a battle. And to me, those are the types of combats I live for. It's not just hit it with a stick till it dies. It's how does this impact our characters? How do they feel about each other? Does it cause us to not trust each other or trust each other more? Whatever those cases may be. So again, chef's kiss. Excellent work.
I want to take that celebration just a wee bit further. You weren't with Michael and Josh and I on the campaign seeds episode that we did on the Friday show a couple weeks back, but what you just described was the epitome of that. We did a whole episode in an effort to show people how to do what you just described, which is take note of these things that are happening earlier in the campaign, because at some point later on, it's going to pay off if you choose to pay that off. And that's exactly what you did from behind the screen. You said, these character moments build to this for this one character. These character moments build to that with this other character. Now I've got an NPC who's right in between them effectively. And I'm going to put the moral choice on this one character and how that impacts the dynamics of those two player characters, how that impacts the way the rest of the world views them, and the campaign from there. That's laying campaign seeds. So without even being on that episode, you're exactly what we were talking about.
And then the nice thing with it is the book builds to that.
Yeah.
Baracus is, him and his son are thorns. So John, if you're listening, the younger Baracus shows up pretty quick. Matter of fact, he's at the funeral and he's mocking the funeral. Build that up, play it up, make the players and the characters kind of hate the guy because he's this very arrogant, rich kid that's making fun of people at a funeral. Play that up because you'll build that up later to what both the Baracuses do later. And the younger Baracus actually becomes a real thorn later because he actually joins the Red Dragon army. And it becomes a scene later. But anyways, to answer your question, yes, that was my favorite fight. Just because I was able to take what was already in the book and really hit a player hard with it. And that's the moments I like as a GM.
Yeah, that's what I live for.
I could give you a +5 Vorpal sword and be like, yay, and you're like, this is awesome. But 2 minutes later, you're like, great, it's on my hip, but now I need armor.
Yeah.
Like, that's how players think. But that moment that they hit, that's the story they tell later.
All right. So, yeah. And then kind of my last question, then I'll turn over to Lee Wanika. How does it end? Do you think, I'm not asking for spoilers, but like the final climatic battle, does it pay off? Is there anything you would do differently the second time, or again to John or someone else, something that you can do to make sure that final encounter lands? So the final encounter is there's floating islands over the city. They're about to drop stuff down, which is straight out of the books. I pulled some stuff out of the books. One thing I did, this is one thing that did just a Chris thing. This is Dragonlance. You're 10th level. Why are you riding a thing called a Dragonelle? Like in the books, this was a scene where there were dragons fighting in the air. So I put all the players on the back of dragons. Really simple way of dealing with it. None of your combat rules change. You're strapped to a back of a dragon. The dragons clash. But you can still do all your skills and spells. I just had it where everybody was rolling at disadvantage because the ground is moving, basically. So they still attacked the bad guys on the back of the dragons and stuff like that. It all leads up to you fighting Kinsaldi Fire Eyes, the commander of the Red Dragon army. Her stats are sad. To change them, because otherwise you're going to have a 2-round combat for the big bad guy. Like
my players at that point at 10th level were doing close to 100 points of damage around collectively. I think she only had like 150, like I'd have to flip to it or whatever. Like I really upped her hit points and I upped her armor class. I threw in something else that was straight out of the books. In the first Dragon High Lord that the heroes of the Lance fought, it had an ability every time he hit, he would say the word. I'm blanking on it. Was it Nightshade? No, not Nightshade. Midnight, something like that. He said a key word, and you saved or you went blind. So I gave her that ability. It was only like a DC 16 con save. 10th level, that's not horrible. Some of the players made it, some of them didn't. But that to me was kind of a nice little thing to throw in there to make that combat go a little longer. Otherwise, like I said, you're looking at 1 or 2 rounds and it wouldn't have felt real climactic.
Yeah.
So, Buzzle Confuzzled.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
Which I think is John. I think that's his.
That's John. Okay.
I think so.
John. I think you're correct now that I'm looking at it. So, and assuming you're talking about the knighting ceremony, for that follow-up question, I think the answer, and John asks, if you're talking about players who are new to D&D, and have some trouble with the social role play aspects, uh, how would you try to push them to think about that? And I think for me, what I would suggest is, if you know, sitting down at your table, one of your friends and one of the people you're running is not that good with the on the spot, let me riff on a concept kind of social role play, then don't make that the thing that they would need to do. So what Chris was describing, as far as this person may say something, this person may hand over something, what you might do in that case, if they're not that good with the actual social role play, is just have them, like, you're going to escort each person there and let them do a role. It doesn't have to be a high DC, but let them feel some of that success with, oh, I did this. And then if they describe something really cool, throw them that advantage on the roll. So they realize, oh, by describing what I'm doing, it helps this work better. So you can kind of lead them that way without necessarily having to force them into it. But that way they're still participating. Like, or you might even just give them like side roles. Maybe there's that character that Chris mentioned. I don't know, but maybe there's a spy in at the ceremony. Maybe they might, because they're not necessarily doing some of the role play or the social parts of that thing. Maybe you give them that opportunity to notice something. You notice somebody has a weird look. Nothing that's actionable, but you notice that, and then give them the ability to either follow up on it or mention that to some bigger NPC down the road, so that they're engaged in the event, but not necessarily put on the spot.
Also, this module, there's 2 NPCs in particular, really take some very in-depth time describing Kardak and Lord Soth. Kardak is a ghost. The scene that you meet him in is supposed to be a role-playing scene. Build the scene up like they can't hurt him. Or what I did is I believe there was an NPC that he basically had a sword at their neck, and it was, if you come at me, I'll just kill this person. Like, he's evil. Like, these are 2 extremely evil characters. Set that up so that they're in an almost feel like they're in a no-win situation if they fight, so they have to do some role playing. Lord Soth, for sure, make sure you definitely describe him as, give him a history check, make it a low DC. Lord Soth is a major figure in D&D, and if you read the stats they gave him, the party will not survive at even 10th level against him. He is not designed in this module for them to fight. He is designed for them to specifically do skill checks to get past. Spend that extra couple minutes really hitting hard and drive that home of, this is Lord Soth. He just walked through a solid stone tunnel or tunnel wall. You can't do that. He just did it with ease. Like, I described it that when the players are like, ooh, I had the advantage of having most of my players know Dragonlance. They're like, oh, wait a minute, we're like level 3, and you just said Lord Soth. Yeah, I'm not going that way. And I'm like, don't use
Yeah.
out of character knowledge. And they're like, can I at least make a history check? I'm like, fire away. Then they hit through history check. I could explain it. And they're like, yeah, we don't want to fight him.
We ain't playing that.
So
Yeah,
then, yeah,
that is a kind of character, and without having played or seen this module, that not having player knowledge could vastly make things bad for your party. So you want to make sure you really talk up those bits.
yeah.
And for those who aren't very familiar in the that listen to this, Lord Soth was one of the people that was involved in the stuff that took place thousands of years ago that caused Dragonlance to go bad. He was part of the problem that caused the gods to run away.
He
So
was he was D&D's first Death Knight.
yeah,
Now, I don't know if he was based on the stats of Death Knight or the Death Knight was created off of Lord Soth, but just to give you an idea, his challenge rating is 19 in this module. I believe the highest level the characters get is 10. They're not going to survive. Um, he can just point at them and they're dead. Like once per day, he has word of death. Boom, you're done. Like Chris hates those types of abilities and doesn't use them, but if you take the time to explain to them, this is not something you can win. And since they're not, maybe they're new to D&D, don't be afraid to use the numbers and go, hey guys, just so you know, out of character, you're level 3. You guys should be fighting things that are challenge rating 3. This guy's challenge rating 19. This is designed for you to do some other things. So let's think about what your characters can do besides just hitting him with a stick. Because Chris would have played Soth as the way he was written a long time ago. So once you get close, you're going to feel really cold and you're going to take damage. But anyways,
yeah.
hopefully that answers your question. You're muted,
Yeah,
Michael.
that
I
word
can
of
see you.
death is that's why you have a beloved NPC with them. So they target the
Yeah.
NPC, and then you're like, oh, they just pointed at my best friend. My best friend's dead. Okay, yeah, I don't want it to point at me. So that's why you have some helper NPCs around, just so you can waste them.
Yeah, but that, I mean, I would say to you, you know, if they want to just beat things up with a stick, most of the encounters they'll be fine with. The role playing ones do lead, like Tatina. When you meet Tatina, you have to fight to free Tatina in a way. She's trapped in her house. Let them fight, then they can do the role playing. Make Tatina fun. You don't have to do what I did. Don't make her randomly roll to see if she falls in love with a party member. She didn't really fall in love with Dave's character, but she was just fascinated with his character. And Dave then said to me, yeah, I don't really like romance and role playing. Okay, well, that ended very quickly. As she then fell in love with somebody else that was an NPC. So, but my point there is you know, don't push them to the role playing. Let it come to them. Because if you push them, they're going to feel like it's your story and not their story. You know, a lot of new players just like to hit things with a stick.
Hitting things with
They
sticks is fun.
Yeah, it takes time to learn what role playing is. Not everybody can just jump in and do that. Some people feel uncomfortable. You know, my first probably year of gaming was just what do the rules say I can do, and me trying to figure out tactics and can I throw a flask of oil and make it explode and then light it with something else? And the GM going, yes, roll. Hey, what's this one mean? Yeah, you threw it backwards. Is there a way I can re-roll it? No. All right, fine. But there are good scenes in the book that are written that should help them to kind of learn that. Like overall, I think this module is written well. The things I changed were more personal things. You know, like you said, more of the flavor of the world, just because I know it so well. You know, you don't have to put dragons in the end if you want to use the dragonelles they use. It's not going to change the story. I did it because that's what was in the book. I added NPCs that are not in here in my story, or I should say the story that we told, because I wanted to add Lorana in there. In the books, she was in Kalaman at this time. She would be leading the Knights of Salamnia. Clay's character has to go report to the Knights. He's going to report to Lorana. Even though she's not in the book, they give you somebody else. That guy's replaced by Lorana. That was a me thing.
Nice.
That wasn't. And I made a very big point in this story that she's leading the Knights of Solamnia, which no elf had ever done. And Clay is like, that's different. Wish I had time to explore that,
Yeah.
but you just gave me an order. I have to go.
Yeah.
If we had kept playing the characters, maybe that could have been something he explored later. But anyways, long-winded answer. Don't force it down their throats. Let it happen naturally, and let the book and the module do it. I said it's pretty well written. You know, like I said, the encounters could be a little tougher. Maybe not change them too much right away until you learn what the players and the characters can do. Keep in mind, I had players that combined, I don't even know how many years combined we have playing. It's in the triple digits, so we definitely had some experience with how to make a character and how to work together.
So my last question would be, I believe this uses milestone leveling. You start at level 1, right? And you go to 10?
Yes.
Do you feel like the leveling matched where they needed to? Would you speed it up, slow it down? I think John is going to start them slightly higher because, again, they're inexperienced, give them like a little extra hit point buff so they don't get murderized right away. But do you think that the leveling matches where they need to for the story?
Yeah. The other thing that, and we didn't touch on this, the module's written to, there's certain sections that talk about playing the board game.
Yeah, don't do that.
And the board game, I've never played it, but you don't need it. It gives you options for option A if this happens in the board game, or option B. I just picked the option I liked better. We didn't play the board game, or honestly, I just ignored them and just kept going with the story. I like the milestone. I've never really liked experience points. Because if we were using experience points, that area I said where there's a bunch of mini dungeons, the players have to do that or you're not going to be high enough level to fight things.
Yeah.
I've always liked milestones. I think the book put them in the right spots.
Okay.
They're probably roughly where I would have put them. And I'll be honest, that's one of my weak points as a GM is remembering to tell characters or players to level up. A lot of times they have to be like, have we leveled up yet? I'm like, oh shit, yeah, you're good.
yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. So,
yeah, I forgot. Good. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
Now I have to up the challenge rating. But,
exactly. Yeah. All right. So,
Yeah,
Leonika, any final thoughts or questions? We do need to wrap up pretty quick, but I dominated that last section, so I want to give you a chance to ask some questions or throw some points out.
I'm pretty happy overall. I would suggest, because it is fairly well paced and we are talking about some newer players, as opposed to maybe starting higher level, because that can turn some other dials and knobs that can give them access to certain powers, abilities, and features faster than they would. So the way an encounter might be settled at a certain point might resolve much faster or much easier than would end up being fun. I might consider, if we're worried about survivability in the very first tier, I might consider something more like give them some kind of poultice or tea that they can drink real quick, basically a quick healing potion that everybody can doff, because and utilize the 2024 kind of rule set, which is do it as a bonus action or something. Just like everybody's got one of these, so you get 1d4 plus whatever, versus giving them starting at a higher level. I would probably do something like that if I'm running a boxed adventure, because what I have found in the past is tweaking one thing actually unchains several other things in weird ways. Or what you would do if you started a little higher earlier is you're going to skip that first milestone. So they basically don't level where they normally level. So if you started them at 2, then they stay 2 until the book says you go to 3, that kind of thing.
That would be my advice if you're going to start. And I also would agree to start, especially this group, I think starting the second level. I don't think it's going to break anything, but it's going to keep them from getting broken too easy.
Yeah. And now that you mention that, what I actually did is I put an encounter before they get to the first city that wasn't in the book. I did that so Chris could understand how the characters are going to interact in the combat. And I can't remember. It was a pretty easy combat, but it told me where the players were going to kind of think about, oh, am I going to attack first? Am I going to do this first? How are they going to synergize as a team? That gave me a pretty good feel for what I would need to do for the first encounter. I can't remember what it was. It was something like just little raiders or something silly. It wasn't anything terrible. It's basically little
You're on
kobolds.
the road, wolves attack, blah blah blah
Yeah,
blah.
just everybody
Something
gets
like
to swing
that.
a sword, and then we move on. Just because I saw this on a video, I want to mention I saw a homebrew rule for how to use potions, which I thought was really cool. Let's say the potion does 1d8 healing. If you do as a bonus action, you roll a d8. If you just take an action, you get 8. So that kind of simulates like you're just trying to like throw it back as quick as you can. So you may not get like all of it in your mouth, or it may not take effect. So that would be a cool homebrew rule if you want to throw in. Everybody gets a free healing potion. Bonus action, they roll for results. Regular action, they just get maximal results. But all right, so that brings us again. This has already been an overstuffed episode. In the RPG Academy, anytime we did a review, we would give it a letter grade rating, kind of like A, B, C, or D, because we were an academy and it made sense. Here we're a cafe. So this was no forethought, but I'm thinking, is this an appetizer? Is it a main course? Is it a dessert? In my mind, that is the high to low or low to high. So where would you put this module? How would you rate it? I don't know. You've never really ran another one, so you're not rating against anything, but would you run it again? Did you enjoy the process? Was it a slog? Again, is it like a starter? Is it a main course, or is it a dessert?
I enjoyed it. I'd run it again, knowing what I did the first time and some of the things I would change. I would change, different things for the players, but I mean, it's definitely a main course. It's not going to leave you hungry, and it's not going to make you fat, but you'll enjoy it.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
All right.
If I
yes.
were to say just my anticipation for eventually running this, only goes up more. Like I would have thought of it more as an appetizer kind of, or maybe a light lunch kind of thing, but based on this conversation, I definitely think this would be something I could have a lot of fun running. And I would probably make very similar or adjacent types of changes as to what Chris did, but every
And
chef
it's
changes the recipe
Yeah,
just a wee bit.
absolutely.
it's 224 pages, so it's not a little 10-page module. It's
It's a
pretty
chunky
thick.
boy.
It's a chunky boy. So I'll make this. I don't know if we've had a true call to action yet for Tabletop Cafe, but we need a rating system. So if anybody else out there has some culinary skills, if you want to come up with what should be our good low to high, 1 to 5, sort of a what each thing should be, let us know. I would love to hear that from you.
Michelin stars.
Michelin star. I mean, I guess that
Yeah.
makes sense. Again, that cafe really isn't like fine dining. So I was trying to think more like a Waffle House sort of menu. But again, thematically that fits. The last thing I want to say
On the scale of IHOP, Bucky's, Waffle House, what are we talking about? I mean,
well,
if we're at Bucky's level, that's a whole thing.
yeah. But I did want to mention a Catacon coming up. Lee Wanika will be there this year with his bubbly self, elevating everybody around him with some great energy. Tabletop Journeys is sponsoring us again this year. So we are offering a badge discount. So when badges go on sale, August 19th, if you get a regular weekend badge or an early bird, which is the same thing, but it's cheaper for the first month, or a GM badge, you can get $5 off if you use the code TTJ5. So just keep that in mind. If anyone is listening, they're thinking about coming, maybe that will get you there. So it's TTJ, the number 5, under the discount code. You can use it as many times as you need to, and that's $5 off a regular badge, the week early bird badge, or a GM badge. And otherwise, just come back here in a couple weeks for their next Tabletop Cafe show. Leonika, again, if you want to mention, the faction book is coming out soon. If people did not back the Kickstarter, they can still get a copy, right?
That is correct. So we have pre-orders are in place now. This is a copy of the print proof that's not on camera well, but we'll definitely be pictures are posted all over anywhere you see TTJ. So you can pre-order. That is a physical hardcover book, 183 plus pages of hardcover gloriousness. And that cover is breathtaking. Like I showed it to my building super who does not game. She's a wonderful human being, but she was like sweeping the front porch, and I was talking to her about. I'm like, I'm so excited because the guy here. She's like, oh really? And I showed
The
her.
new phone
She's
books
like,
are here.
And she's like, that's gorgeous. Like everybody who sees that cover loves it. So check us out. Pre-order. We've got other add-ons that are on the backer on that pre-order page as well. So if there's other things you want to get, but absolutely come see this. I can guarantee you the games I have planned for a Catacon, I will be utilizing some of the groups that are in the factions book.
Yep. We will be doing some Star Wars Dread, some Scooby-Doo Dread. The Murder Mystery LARP is coming back. There'll be some Star Trek Adventures. There'll be some karaoke. It's going to be an amazing time. So that's Dayton, Ohio, November 7th, 8th, and 9th. Badges go on sale August 19th. All right, Chris, how would you like to sign off tonight, sir?
John, let me know how it goes.
Fantastic. Again, Friday's first session. We'll see how it goes.
Can't wait to hear about it.
So again, and we will just sign off here like we used to at the RPG Academy, because I think it still holds that if you're having fun,
You're
doing
it right.
it right.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.